So, chapter 5, the vital role of the intellect. The human race suffers from the virus of attachment and aversion, greed and envy, lust and jealousy, and a host of other baneful emotions. The virus has destroyed the human intellect. Even the intelligentsia have stopped thinking, inquiring. They seem quite complacent with merely obtaining information, knowledge, from external sources. The knowledge thus acquired provides them with mere intelligence, and they become informed on one or more subjects. But that does not develop one's original independent thinking, free from past influence and bias. There is a dire need for human beings to develop the intellect and use it to control, direct the mind's activity towards their resurrection. So again, as we discussed last week, what we find is that, yes, we can split this personality into these three components: a body, a mind, and an intellect. And body, obviously, we need a body. We need to execute actions. We need a way in which we can receive stimuli from the world. And therefore, the body fulfills that particular need for the human personality. Without a body, there ceases to be life. Similarly, with the mind and intellect, a human being devoid of an intellect is not a human being. In fact, there's no such thing as a human being without a mind, or a human being, for that matter, without an intellect. Now, what we do appreciate is that without an intellect, what happens is the mind's nature just perforce manifests, which for all purposes is okay. There is a particular nature that the mind has. But what we had discovered from last 2 weeks' sessions is that an ungoverned mind can prove problematic. So when the emotions overwhelm the intellect, we see that the personality is affected or impacted negatively. So what we often see is not only are people very emotional, impulsive, making decisions based purely on the mind, but what we see is this problem is accentuated. This problem is continued because there's no emphasis or attention placed on developing the intellect. And as he says in the texture, even the intelligentsia, now intelligentsia are intelligent people, people that have the capacity perhaps to be able to inquire. But even the intelligentsia are merely satisfied with knowledge. So this is exactly what's happening. And we'll cover this a little bit later in the course, this education. We go into a whole subject on education. But just to give you a little prelude to that, what has happened is that the education system is supporting the acquisition of intelligence. One could say that we live in an age of information. As you all know, it doesn't take more than a few seconds for you to gain access to any piece of information. And the schooling system, the university system, is centered around this acquiring of information, which is just intelligence. A computer can do the same thing. So children go to school, and in order to get to the next grade, they got to remember certain facts. They got to learn and memorize certain things and repeat that, and then they get pushed through. And the same process is happening all through university, which is why we have a lot of people that have intelligence, but not many that have an intellect. See, it's important that you distinguish the two. Remember, an intellect is that capacity within you to think, reason, judge, and decide. The intelligence is just knowledge gained from external sources. Very different things. I know they both got INTELL in them, but very, very different applications, very, very different processes that we arrive at when we examine these two various aspects. So he says in the text here, the intellect allows you to think independently, objectively, free from bias. Now, we all know that a human being is endowed with this dilemma of choice. It's a dilemma because the choosing capacity is compromised. The intellect, as we're finding out through this book called The Fall of the Human Intellect, the intellect is compromised. So what's happening is that faculty which enables you to make right choices, effective choices in life, is compromised. And therefore, where is the chance for you to not only find happiness, peace, but productivity? You need an intellect for all of these things. So intelligence, we're not writing it off. We're not saying, okay, let's discard intelligence altogether. We need professionals. We need doctors. And for that, you need to gain a certain amount of intelligence. In fact, I studied medicine. I know exactly that the vast amount of intelligence that you need just to be able to sit in front of a patient and be able to understand what malady they're suffering from or what disease they're suffering from. You got to draw on a wealth of information. That's intelligence. What we are, however, observing or showing is that this intelligence is acquired at the detriment of building an intellect. So all the intelligence you can get in the world at best can give you a job. Maximum amount of intelligence, better job. That's it. That is not going to help you meet the challenges you face in your life. How are you going to get on with your spouse? How are you going to get on with your children? Not be so attached to your children. We understood the detriments of attachment in the last lecture. How are you going to execute goals? These are all tasks undertaken by the intellect. So it doesn't matter how much intelligence you have. Okay, intelligence gets you a job and brings the money in. Why do you think we're seeing such high divorce rates? Why do you think we're seeing such scenarios playing out where there is depression, anxiety, divorce, suicide? Because there's no intellect. You can't make the choices. So you end up making the wrong choices. I mean, a lot of people with a lot of money, and believe you me, they're no closer to happiness than anybody else. In fact, potentially even further away, because they fall into the blunder of believing that wealth can provide happiness. Of course, it can provide many things, but a subjective sense of well-being is not one of them. So you must understand this difference. Now, what he's saying here, what the author is saying is that because there's no scope for development of the intellect, people have stopped thinking. You cannot think for yourself anymore. People have lost their faculty to think, to reason. If you understand thinking, reasoning as a human prerogative, no other species is blessed with this faculty. Humans must revive it for their survival. They are not innately endowed with the ability to think clearly and logically, and they do not care to develop it. Thinking is not something that comes to you naturally, like respiration or perspiration. You must devote time and effort to question, reason, and build your intellect. See, again, he draws our attention to this fact. A human being alone has an intellect. No other creature has an intellect. We covered this in the 3 species that earlier on in the course. And we can argue that to an extent, an animal has a rudimentary intellect. For all purposes, it's not there. Even an intelligent creature that's only a few chromosomes off a human being, let's say an ape, an orangutan, it doesn't have the capacity to construct a rocket and conquer space. It doesn't have the capacity to build a wristwatch and, be observant of time and just sees the days going by. So in that sense, it's a rudimentary intellect. Even a dog can know master and stranger. Differentiation is there, but for all purposes, it's not there. So that's why we say it's not present in animals, only at a very rudimentary level. So we've got this intellect for a reason, because we are the only creature that is endowed with choice. Now, the choices we make are going to impinge on the quality of life we have. If we are constantly making the wrong choices, we're going to find that our life is not so easy. In fact, it might lead to bitter disappointment. It might lead to also a host of different problems. So we have been given this choice of action. We can evolve to the highest, to the state of spiritual awakening, enlightenment. At the same time, we can choose and evolve downwards. Animals don't have that luxury. They got a set program that they live by. So we've been given this choice of action. With it, the intellect, that choosing faculty. But very few people understand the importance. If there's one thing you learn from this talk, one thing, the importance of developing your intellect, your own intellect. Never mind about your partner's intellect or your mother, your father's intellect. That's something they got to do by themselves. Of course, we're not saying don't educate them on this vital equipment. So we find ourselves with this intellect. Everyone gets born with it. It's like a birthday present. Your birthday present as you're born as a human being is intellect. There you go, birthday present. How's your intellect? Like the muscles of the body, it has to be developed. But people don't appreciate this. People think that they can think without putting in the necessary effort to learn the skill and art technique of thinking. It's a skill. It requires practice. It requires a knowledge on a methodology to employ it and to develop it, without which the chances are that you have not. If you, number one, don't know what the intellect is, of course, you're not going to develop it. Number two, if you know what the intellect is, but you don't know how to develop it, you're not going to develop it. Number three, just because you've been to school doesn't mean that you're going to have a developed intellect, because as we discussed, the schooling system is not catering to developing critical thinking, original, independent thinking. It's designed to accumulate intelligence. So the problem with the lack of intellect is actually graver than it appears to be. It is aggravated by the fact that one needs an intellect to notice the absence of intellect. Very, very interesting. The problem with the lack of intellect is graver than it appears to be. Fortunately for you guys and for people that are exposed to this knowledge, and it's just knowledge, you understand that the problems that we are dealing with in the world, and they are vast, they are many. Nobody needs to tell you that. You can observe for your own self. There's a war building up in the north. There's a pandemic. There's corruption in the south. There's erosion of human rights. There's inequality. I could sit here all night and we'd run out of time going over all the problems that we face in the world. And fundamentally, what we have to appreciate is all those problems stem from a defunct intellect. See, if you were able to think clearly, if you had morals and values on which your thinking was based, where would the cause of corruption be? Where would the cause of inequality be? Where would the cause of suppression of nations and genocide be? It wouldn't exist. So nobody understands that the problem comes from a lack of development of the intellect. Now, this is aggravated, he says here, and this is very interesting, aggravated by the fact that one needs an intellect to notice the absence of intellect. See, the fact that there are 14 of you here in this classroom, it's amazing. Honestly, it is amazing. Because what that essentially means is that in each one of you, there is some intellect. I'm not going into the extent of how developed it is. There has to be some intellect for you to understand that, yes, I need to develop this intellect. Most people are unaware of the intellect. And because they don't have an intellect, They don't understand that they need to develop it. That's the problem. So people are running around without intellects and they don't understand the need to develop it. So you can congratulate yourself. You've understood there's that much intellect in you that understands the vital need to develop it. There's a famous quote by Arthur Schopenhauer. He says, intellect is invisible to the man who has none. Highlighting this exact point that we've just discussed. So what happens? The plight of human beings is that they do not know their activities lack the support of thought, reason, or judgment. The mass of humanity mechanically follows a routine pattern of life set by its predecessors. There is little investment of rationale or logic in the present mode of living. People are unaware that their lives are following a herd instinct. They do not realize the gravity of this situation. So this is exactly what happens. When you are unable to think for yourself, when you are unable to think independently, originally, you are dominated by the mind. Lack of intellect, essentially. Now, the mind has this tendency to follow the herd. It follows that which has been done before. Why are you a Christian? Well, I come from a Christian household. My mother and father are both Christian. My friends are all Christian. I went to Christian school. Therefore, I'm Christian. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being Christian. You could apply that same rationale to any religion. Has anybody ever thought, why am I following this religion? This religion makes no sense to me. Okay, just because my mother and father are doing it, is that any reason I should do it? Just because the pastor or the preacher or the Swami says this, does that mean it's right for me? Without that faculty of thinking, we fall into this trap, this herd mentality. You may say, well, that's okay, at least we're all together in this herd, Listen, it's all good and well in the herd. There is some protection in the herd, except when you're faced with a cliff. One sheep jumps off the edge of a cliff. It happened in Turkey. One sheep jumps off the edge of the cliff. 1,500 leapt to their death. Now imagine you're in that herd and the cliff is coming up in front of you. You're getting closer and closer. Ooh, no, I don't like this herd anymore. You got the force of the whole herd behind you. What are the chances? You're going over. You're going over. This is happening all the time. Most people are completely unaware of it. So we often use this analogy in not knowing about the disease of the mind. See, to have a disease is pretty bad, right? Imagine you are at home, you're ill, you don't know what's wrong with you. It's bad. The doctor comes over and he says, oh, this is the problem. You've got acute bronchitis. Ah, okay. And they give you the cure. They give you the medicine, remedy, whatever your modality of cure is. That's a bad situation, but it's okay because it's curable. Now imagine you have a disease and you don't know what it is. It could be anything and you don't know. That can be fatal. You think you're suffering from a mild something, fever, bit of fever and a sore throat. Next thing you find out, well, when it's too late, you're dead. From what? He died of COVID. I'll just give you an example. So to have a disease is pretty bad, but to have a disease and not know it can be fatal. And that's exactly the position we're in. We've got this disease of defunct intellect and nobody knows it. It's fatal. The need of the hour is to recognize this grave situation and to build the intellect Start the process by thinking, examining, and questioning every moment, every facet of your life. The need of the hour. This is what's needed for humanity now. You lift yourself by yourself. Nobody else can do it. You will need to start this process of building your own intellect. How do you do it? Well, one of the ways we can look at this is the same as how would you build a muscle? Well, if you want to build some strong biceps, what would you do? Well, you'd probably go off to the gym, pick up some weight, start doing some bicep curls. I don't know. Any of you seen me? You'll understand I'm not a gym person. No, I would imagine you'd do some bicep curls. There's probably a few exercises you can do, some at home too, to build big biceps. The same analogy applies to the intellect. How do you build an intellect? Very simply by using the intellect. So every time you're faced with a situation, and believe you me, your whole life is a situation in the sense that from morning to night, you are faced with the 2 C's, challenges and choices. Challenges, choices, challenges, choices, challenges, choices. That's it. That's your life. To choose to hit snooze or wake up, to choose to have breakfast or skip breakfast, what to have for breakfast. Oh my goodness, it's load shedding. I haven't done this. Challenge, what to do. So you're going through this process of challenges and choices all the time. Now it's in your interest to execute this thinking. You got to execute thinking in all of these choices. The more you can think about things, the stronger your intellect will become. There's two essential tools or 2 essential processes that you need to employ in developing the intellect. Take nothing for granted. That's the first one. The problem is we've taken everything for granted. Why do you go to school? Everyone goes to school. University, what do you do after university? What do you do after school, Craig? You go to university. Then get a job, then marry, then children, then die. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with any of those things, but at any point, I'm just drawing your attention to massive life milestones. These are important decisions. At any point, not whether I should have toast or I should have cereal. These are big decisions. Has anyone stopped and thought, is it necessary for me to go to university? Some of the greatest thinkers, they didn't go to university. They didn't attend university. There's no need. They could think for themselves. Marriage, we covered 6 reasons. Did anybody think before they got married of those 6 reasons? Children, are you designed for children? Are you capable of raising children? Nobody thinks. They just follow this herd mentality. So you will have to, it says here, examine and question every moment, every facet of life. We're not saying overthink it. Just apply some thought before you engage in any activity, before you engage in any thought process of choice. In other words, before you choose, before you have to make a decision, please consult the intellect, weigh up the pros and cons. Is this beneficial? Is this action going to take me towards my chosen goal? Is it taking me away from my goal? Is it in the service of others? Is it in the service of myself? You got to analyze, and you'll have your own parameters on which you're making your choices dependent on your value system. And that'll be different for everybody. This is why Vedanta is a double-edged sword, because not only does it teach you to fortify your intellect, but it does it in the context of higher values too. So it makes it a very productive tool, especially if you are interested in spiritual evolution or self-development. What is the result of not applying the intellect or not thinking? The world has lost the wondrous faculty of the intellect to think originally independently. People are possessed with groundless beliefs and faiths. You pick them up without question or reason, without proof of their credibility, and accept them as a matter of fact. You must realize some of your strongest beliefs had taken root in your childhood. Your life runs on those faithful lines. They seem too obvious to you that you feel it would be sacrilegious to question them. So, what has happened is that we all have a set of beliefs. We all have a set of values. We all have certain things that we think to be true. If we are to retrace those beliefs, especially those deep-seated beliefs within our personality, if we were to retrace them, often we find that we accumulate a lot of those so-called truths or beliefs or facts or faiths from early on in life. And even those that we've acquired later, you may choose to examine those too. And you'll find that most of them are picked up without any real questioning. Like we mentioned, it's a case of passively accepting them. These are what form our biases. We take something as being true because we believe it to be true. And everybody has biases. Even at the present time, there's biases going on. It's been happening in the past. This will happen in the future. People have certain biases. And you may say, well, yes, so what? And there's nothing wrong with having biases. But what we are scrutinizing here is, how did you gain those biases? How did you gain those particular inclinations? And often what we find when we start examining is that we passively acquired them. When I say we passively acquired them, what I mean by that is that there was no thinking applied in accepting those particular beliefs as truth. Mother did it, my father did it, must be true. The teacher's telling me this, must be true. The news is saying this, must be true. They're reliable. The politicians, the government is saying this, must be a fact. So what's happened? We passively just accept it without questioning it. Now, what he's referring to here, what the author is referring to, is strong beliefs that mold your personality. What you find is a lot of those you acquired from childhood. And now they're so rooted and ingrained in your personality. He says here, you would feel it would be sacrilegious to question them. Imagine you had to question your very faith, your very religion, your very belief system, your very value structure. Imagine questioning those now. And see, for those that I can see, most people in the room are not twilight, but middle-aged, let's say, middle-aged. Now imagine questioning these things. 30, 40 years have passed where you have hung on to these ideas, passively accepted, hung on to these ideas. Now you fear even to question them because you're going to rock the apple cart, rock the boat too much. You prefer just not to. So there's no inquiry. See, if you really want to take up spiritual edification, if you are really interested in self-development, you have to tackle these things at some point. You have to examine each and every one of your belief systems. Each one of them. You'll have to figure out what they are. How have they been acquired? And you will need to then go about figuring out whether there's any veracity in them. Does any of this make sense? Nah. Does it make no sense? Okay. Perhaps I could be wrong. A guy at the academy once said, if you're launching on this path, it's like building a house, right? You lay the foundations and you start with the walls and you start building. And then you get to a point, right? You get to a point where something has gone awry. And you go, oh my goodness. Well, we can just kind of work around that. But you know that what you really have to do is break that whole wall down, break that side of the house down. That's the real solution. A person who is ready for this path is prepared to do that. So a person who is ready for this journey of self-development must be willing to scrutinize all their beliefs and be willing to discard any that do not make sense or do not line up, match up to what is now considered truth. William Drummond says, he who cannot reason is a fool. He who will not is a bigot. He who dare not is a slave. So again, you will need to examine where in this picture do you fit. See, if you can't reason, that's a fool. A fool is not a bad thing because a fool can change, right? He can learn how to reason. He can learn the technique of employing his intellect to reason. A bigot, on the other hand, is a little bit harder. He's more set and stuck in his ways. It's negative, it becomes negative. Fool is not so negative. In fact, they often use this term foolish. In fact, it's the word they use is balaha, which actually means children. Foolish, you know, there's scope for improvement. A bigot, less so, because he's more ingrained. A person who dare not, cannot apply reason, slave. It's actually a slavish mentality that you will not reason. You will not think for yourself. You will hang on to it. It's a form of fanaticism in a way. So he says, a fool is a person lacking in wisdom, judgment, or sense, which, okay, is not great, but you can learn wisdom, you can gain wisdom, you can develop judgment and sense. A bigot is a person who blindly and obstinately devoted a particular set of ideas or creed and dismissive towards others. You can see that situation a little bit more difficult to get out. A slave, a person who is submissive under domination. This is where nobody wants to end up. Yet this is where most have ended up. Right, there's just a question. When from Asanda, when you examine your beliefs, what do you do with the things you know you don't understand yet? And this is a great question. Of course, we're not going to understand everything. But the first thing we need is a willingness to gain understanding. Anything that we need to still understand implies lack of knowledge. If we don't understand something, that means we are ignorant of that. So how do we combat ignorance? We combat ignorance through knowledge. Now, what you're saying is, okay, I don't have the knowledge yet. So now what? And very interesting that you bring up this question because it segues exactly what we're going to be talking about in this lesson. And that's an element of faith. So, of course, if you don't know something, you engage in a process whereby you learn something to remove that ignorance, but not knowing it, what do you do in that interim? There's a gap, right? Your knowledge is here. What you want to know is here. That lacuna or that deficit is ignorance, which you are trying to make up. So in the meantime, we pitch up a faith in that particular thing. But again, it's not a blind faith. It's not a blind acceptance. It's a faith based on corroboratory evidences. I'm not going to say more because we're going to examine this in a bit. Are you okay, Asanda? Right. So, pseudo-religion. The loss of intellect and its application to life has caused the fungus of pseudo-religious and psychic bodies to spread everywhere, resulting in astrologers and soothsayers, vastu shastris, and feng shuis proliferating and destroying the dignity and grandeur of the human race. The world has reached a tragic state where such pseudo practices are flourishing, while the true human culture is fast perishing. So all of these practices play into the very nature of people who lack questioning, because they know they can get away with it. They know that people are willing to suck up anything, believe anything, if it can potentially improve their lives, because they understand there's no real investigation. So this decline in intellect, as we see, creates a gullible species subject to false practices. Now, we have nothing against these practices. Of course, any of these practices that are mentioned here, astrology is a fine art that takes longer than a doctor, for sure, the study of astrology, far longer. Proper astrology, study of the stars and the interrelationship with in the planetary system, in the cosmos, is a highly specialized field. And not that you do a 6-week course or a weekend getaway and learn astrology, but this is exactly what people are doing. They're not prepared to dedicate 10, 20 years to really figure it out, and that's really what's required. It's similar with all these things. So they fly by nights. They get enough information, a little bit more information than the rest of the population. And I'm not saying they have malicious intentions, but they know just that little bit more. And the people are so dumbed because there's no capacity to question that they just passively take it all on board. Just accept it because, oh, this person is, yeah, he's knowledgeable. He must know what he's talking about. So again, we're not ridiculing these lost arts, but we are just giving an example of how these pseudo-religious practices are flourishing because of lack of application, lack of intellect. How can a person tell that they are being misled by pseudo-spiritual practices if the intellect has not been developed? They won't. Unfortunately, they won't. It's the same question. How do you tell if you are being overwhelmed by your emotions or you're being impulsive? Chances are you won't. You might notice it later. That is a possibility. But chances are you won't, because your intellect is not strong enough. So, of course, we have to be on our guard. There's a verse in the Bhagavad Gita. He says, you move about in the world like a tortoise. I don't know if any of you have seen how a tortoise moves. Very cautiously. He's looking around. At the first sign of something funny going on, he withdraws. So this is one form in which you may be able to protect yourself from these pseudo-religions. Of course, the other way is to put your trust in someone who you believe has a more powerful intellect. So you understand, okay, yes, my intellect is not so developed. I'm working on developing it, but in the process, I could be making the wrong decisions. I could be subjected to these pseudo-religious practices. So how do I protect myself? Well, you can always recourse to someone who you believe has a more powerful intellect. Hey, I was just in this situation. You get that person on the phone, that person you trust, who you believe is more developed than you. And, what do you think about this situation? And they can help you analyze it. In fact, that's the role of the guru. He doesn't necessarily give you the answers, but he can sit and help you analyze it. At the end of the day, you got to make your own decisions. A guru will never tell you what to do and what not to do. You will have to make your own independent decisions. You okay, Daksha? Okay, great. Right. So, intelligence. Humanity is blatantly ignorant and pays no attention to the most essential aspect of human development, building the intellect. The modern generation assesses a person only through his scholastic education and overt behavior. Much time and effort is devoted to language, grammar, and construction, and all emphasis is on information, knowledge, and technology acquired from external sources. None sees the importance, nay, the necessity to think clearly, correctly, to develop the art and skill of thinking. Self-appointed educators today lack the fundamentals of education. They are unaware of their limitation to think originally. But the problem lies not in their ignorance, but their firm belief that they know what they really do not. Josh Billings highlights this in his famous words: the trouble with most folks is not so much ignorance as their knowing so many things which ain't so. Again, anyone pick it up? This reference, subtle reference to fools and bigots. See, if you got ignorance, that can be made up. You can learn things, you can gain knowledge. But if you believe you know, that's where learning stops. If you believe you know, there's no progress. No, I know. That's why you always must be open. A wise person, a person interested in development, self-development, is always open to correction. Somebody makes a comment. Am I that way? Someone challenges your belief. Do they have a point? But if we know, no, I know, this is right, there's no chance of restructuring the mind. There's no chance of diluting your preconceived notions or biases. You get stuck. And this is the problem. As he says, not even the educators are aware. In fact, Swamiji goes so far as saying that education is in the hands of the uneducated. Simply giving out information with no real ability to invite questioning. You need to wake up from the slumber. Start thinking, questioning, inquiring as to the cause of all this strife and struggle. Examine the truths of life. Do not accept anything without reason and logic. Apply your intellect to verify their authenticity. Whatever complies with the principles of sound judgment, learn to accept them. Apply them in your life. You will then taste the joy of higher and chaster living. That would usher peace and harmony in the world. So here he's offering some sort of solution. Otherwise you think, well, he's just pointing out all these negative things and, what do we do about this? I feel like not empowered. So here he empowers you in a way to offer some sort of solution. And that, of course, we understand by now, lies with you. The problem is with you. The solution is with you. You are the architect of your fortune. You are the architect of your misfortune. You make yourself, you mar yourself. So developing the intellect is a process undertaken by yourself. You're going to need to fire it up. Start thinking, start questioning, start examining the truths of life. Those truths need to resonate with your logic and reason. They need to make sense to you. Don't take things on passively. Question them. Is there any sense in this? Why am I going every Friday to the mosque and bowing down 10 times, 5 times? Sorry, I don't know how many it is exactly. Why that number? You may do it. Why? Start asking why. Why only on Friday? Why do I go to the church and light a candle? What is that for? Why do I go to the temple and burn the camphor? I'm not just talking in religious context here. Every aspect of your life. Why do I hold on to these particular beliefs? Why do I do things in a particular way? Why do I react to certain stimuli in this way? Is there a better way of functioning? So again, you need to employ your intellect to develop the intellect from known to unknown. Humans have lost this fundamental principle of education. Few understand that knowledge proceeds from the known to the unknown. An unknown entity can be known only through known factors and not through other known factors. Consider the origin of the world. It is unknown. People question, inquire as to the origin. The answer given to them is that God created the world. God is declared to be the origin of the world. This is no answer, for God too is unknown to humanity. How can one unknown factor convey the knowledge of another unknown factor? It's very interesting. He talks about this concept of education, and it must proceed from known to unknown. I'll give you a simple example which highlights this point. I say to you, right, I've decided to gift everyone a book at the end of the course. This is just an example, by the way. And you're welcome to come and collect it from my home. And everyone is, great, great, great. Only the people that finish the course, by the way. Great, great, great. That sounds fantastic. Free stuff, free book. And because you've learned sort of to question, you go, that's great, Craig, but you didn't tell us where you live. Oh, right. Yes, you got me there. You got me there. No. It's very easy. It's it's at the bottom of the next to the stream, at the bottom of the field. What stream? What field? Oh, right. Sorry. Do you know this church? It's the Church of Latter-day Saints in Constantia. No, I don't. Okay. Do you know the BP garage across the road from the mall in Constantia? I'm just making all this up, by the way. No. See, I can go on and on, giving you facts. Yes, I lived there by the stream next to the field, across the way from the church. These are all facts. But until I give you a known factor, one known factor, you'll never know where I live. Eventually, I say to you, oh, you know what? Do you know where they built the new Checkers Emporium at the Circle of Ladies Mile? Ah, yes. I know exactly where that is. Well, that's across the road from the BP, and then you can work it out, and then you can get exactly to where you're going. Unless there's a known factor, Any unknown factor will not help you. And he uses it in the context here of God. What is God? Who knows what God is? You see, everybody's got their own ideas. I'm not discounting that. Everybody knows exactly what God is. But who truly knows? We have our beliefs, no doubt. What is God? In fact, we tackle this in the very last chapter of the book, the very last class. But for the purpose of our discussion, we must move from known to unknown. That's why we start. What are you? I know, Craig, I'm a human being. What is a human being? Okay, I know I've got this body. What else is there? I've got a mind that has emotions. Yes, I can appreciate that. There's a mind feeling things and an intellect that thinks. Yes, I think I did that once or twice. So slowly, we take you through a process, moving you from unknown. Maybe you didn't know what the intellect is. Now you know. Now we can progress like that. Okay, the need of the hour. The world needs to build a think tank to guard the rest of the world, the rest of humanity, sorry. A state of emergency has been created by hosts of militant non-thinkers, and humans have become an endangered species. And I say, come on, really? Really? The critical need of the hour is to salvage the residual thinkers, get them together and launch on a massive program to revive the art, skill, technique of original thinking and reasoning. People need to carefully rehabilitate, rebuild their fallen intellect. A sound intellect alone can face and overcome this threatening situation created by humans. With a reconstituted intellect, the new generation of thinkers must reflect upon truths laid down by ancient savants and sages, experiment and verify the authenticity of these truths in practical life, and build their conviction. With such conviction, they must communicate the solemn truths to save humanity from the brink of extinction. So, of course, we understand that there is a dire need to resurrect the fallen intellect. It has fallen. We can see the mind completely dominates the personality. There's no intellect at all. A herd mentality had possessed the human race. It says we need to get thinkers together, and this is exactly what we're doing. Okay, there are few of us, but it only takes a few. See, you learn these truths of life. When I say learn, you got to go through a scientific methodology in this approach to philosophy. You will have to examine, you will have to scrutinize, you will have to test it out. Okay, we learned this, but is there any truth in it? Does it make sense? Go through that process, apply it in certain situations in your life. Study, reflect on these truths being presented in these great texts in scriptural truths. Examine them, process them, reflect on them, think about them. Slowly, you'll find that you start developing a clarity of thought, not just accepting. See, even in this classroom, the teacher is giving lots of information, lots of knowledge. That will not help you, unfortunately. You may go, what am I doing here then? That's why I said in the beginning, get the textbook. Because without the textbook, what are you going to do? You're just going to listen to me once a week and, that was very nice. And you may get more information about Vedanta, information on living your life better. That's not going to translate into you living your life better. That comes through this process of reflection. You absorb those values that ring true once they admit your own logic and reason, and then you're able to live them. Pick yourself up. So there has to be this process of inquiry, genuine inquiry. It's not just a passive listening. Yes, apparently this guy has studied in India for 5 years and he's running a center and he's taught by a great master. What he's saying must be true. No, you can't just passively accept anything I'm saying. And this is why it's so great that The questions come through as we're discussing these things. It's important. Without questioning, and it doesn't have to always manifest in a question being presented, but this process needs to be going on in your own personality, questioning the veracity of each statement. Again, without the textbook, it's very difficult. The textbook, at least you can go through each sentence, each paragraph. We're missing out a lot. We don't have time to cover everything. That's why you go through the textbook, you ask questions if there are any that come up. Role of faith. There is a general misconception that intellectuals ignore the importance of faith. It is not so. Faith has a distinct role to play in human life. In truth, humanity cannot survive without the element of faith. So, Asanda, this is going to be addressing a little bit more of your question. So, you cannot escape faith, is what he's saying. And say, well, I don't really rely so much on faith. Really? When you entered the Zoom room, there was whether you're conscious of it or not, there's a certain faith that the electricity was going to power your Wi-Fi and your devices and the lights so that you would make it through the lecture. You're sitting in your lounge. There's a faith that, again, whether you're conscious of it or not, that the roof is not going to come down. No, I trust the people that built this house or sound company. Roof's not going to come down. You get into Uber. You have faith that the driver will take you to your destination. You go to a restaurant. You have faith that the food is not contaminated. When you start looking at it, every aspect of your life relies on an element of faith. Now, when we start talking about spiritual truths, a lot of people start discounting. What is faith? What is faith? What do you need faith for? It must be proved. Everything else requires a certain amount of faith. And this is the deficit I was talking about earlier. Until you know it, there's an element of faith that you need. Once you come to know it, you don't need that faith. Once the Uber driver's dropped you off, you don't need faith that he's going to drop you off. You're there. You're at your destination. You've got out the payment's gone through. It's done. You understand? So actually, we can't survive without faith. It would be impossible. So he says, these cases and countless others in your life rest on faith. But then it is not blind faith. You cannot dismiss them as unfounded beliefs. They are no doubt belief or faith, but several corroboratory evidences go together to support their credibility. So I don't know if you recall, I said earlier, faith is important, but it's not a blind belief. No. I have faith that if I go to church every Friday and I surrender Lord Jesus Christ as my savior, I will go to heaven. Why do you believe that? Well, that's just what I believe. I'm not saying that belief is wrong, but we're talking about a faith as not just a blind belief. I believe that because that's what I believe. Or that's what the pastor says, or that's what the Bible says. Again, I'm not having a go at the religion as such. I'm having a go at this, or trying to explain what this blind acceptance is, this blind faith. You just someone believe it. No, it must be substantiated by evidence. Okay, yes, the Uber driver's got a 4.5 star rating. I believe he's a sound driver. He's got into the car. He's wearing his mask. He's not drunk or anything like that. You start putting together all these evidences and then say, yes, I have a faith that he'll take me to my destination. You go to a restaurant. Yes, I know many people have eaten here. And I've eaten there before and there were no problems. And I got all the meal. I got the right order. There was no contamination. So faith is backed by corroboratory evidences. It's not a blind faith we're talking about here. So that supports the credibility of this faith. There's a quote by Joel Goldsmith. It says, a belief, he's describing what faith is, a belief in a thing I do not know until I come to know what I believe in. A belief in a thing I do not know until I come to know what I believe in. So as you were saying, Asanda, when you examine your beliefs, what do you do with the things you know you don't understand yet? A belief in a thing I don't understand and I don't know it yet. So faith fills in until you come to know it. So faith, in a way, fills that gap between your current level of knowledge and what you are attempting to understand. Rabindranath Tagore, he defines faith as, faith is the bird that feels the light and sings while the dawn is still dark. Beautiful, beautiful quote by this poet, Rabindranath Tagore. Faith is the bird that feels the light. There's no light yet, but the birds somehow know. I've got chickens here and they know. Every morning they know. They start crying. They know the sun is coming. They feel it and sing. It's a sing. They're singing. While it's still dark, they have that faith. Poetic license. Shraddha. Now, Shraddha is interesting because the closest word for faith in Indian language is Shraddha. But Shraddha encompasses more than mere faith. There's no direct translation of Shraddha. It encompasses more than just faith. In Shraddha, the mind starts with faith in something, but it does not end there. The intellect thereafter pursues it until it is assimilated, made one's own. So this is where faith and Shraddha differ. So Asanda, coming back to your question, which has actually proved to be very valuable in the context of what we're talking about. So you would apply Shraddha. Yes, you have faith. Okay, I have faith that, what this guy is talking about could make sense. And because everything else he said has made sense. I'm just giving an example. Now, Shraddha, faith is just there. Okay, I believe that, this could be true. Shraddha means you employ the intellect. Remember, we're discussing the vital role of the intellect. You employ the intellect to fill that void, fill that deficit to get to that point of knowing. So faith implies, yes, you can, even if it's a positive faith in the sense that there's corroboratory evidences, but that doesn't mean you'll get there. You could just sit at faith, the faith level. I have faith that it could happen. Shraddha, you actually pursue it. You pursue it till the end, until you get there. You'll appreciate in spiritual evolution, it's far more advantageous to possess Shraddha in your pursuit.